What is up, YouTube? Today I'm coming back at you with another video, and today's video is going to be a little bit of a different video. I know I haven't made a video in a while, but this is something that I thought it'd be a cool video to do. So today we're going to be doing a review on a gaming laptop. In fact, the gaming laptop that I am now using as my main gaming machine. And I decided to do a review of this because this would be considered a very entry-level priced gaming laptop, and you can still buy it, but this is the same laptop that Walmart had on Black Friday as their Black Friday doorbuster. So we're going to be taking a look at it, running it through some games, and basically seeing how good does this perform for the price that you pay for it, and if it's worth it or not, especially with a lot of new games coming out and with the hardware that's in here. So the laptop we're going to be taking a look at is the HP Pavilion gaming laptop. Now, I'm not sure. Let me open it up for you. That's what the inside looks like. It's got a green accent to it, which I really like, and it looks really, really cool. So let me show you the bottom. This is a newer version of this. Walmart has had a couple different versions of this gaming laptop over the past couple years. The older versions have green foot plates. That's one way you can differentiate it. This is a newer model. They actually still sell this on their website, so you can still buy it, but for a bigger price. So the specs for this machine: you have an Intel Core i5 9300H quad-core hyper-threaded CPU. You have 8 gigabytes of DDR4 RAM. So you don't have. That's probably the biggest weak point in my opinion, is only having 8 gigs of RAM. I haven't opened this one up yet and to see if you can actually upgrade it or not. So that's something that you'll have to do yourself. But it does have 8 gigs of RAM, which is doable for games. So it's not too bad, but it's not great either. It's got a 15.6-inch Full HD IPS screen. It's 1080p, 60 hertz refresh rate, I think. So you're pretty much gonna get pretty average performance out of the screen refresh rate and all that stuff. However, I will say the colors look really nice on this screen, and it's got a matte finish. And for a matte finish screen, the colors are pretty punchy. So I will say that. And it also comes with a 256 gigabyte solid state drive. So pretty decent specs, nothing too extraordinary. Oh, I also forgot to mention, of course, the most important part, the GPU. So this also comes with an NVIDIA GeForce GTX 1050. Not the TI, just a plain 1050. So that's basically the gaming specs of this. So going into this, I was sort of skeptical of what sort of performance I could expect. I did a bunch of research before buying this computer because I wanted to get a gaming laptop and shift a little bit more towards PC gaming, just for space constraints, and I miss playing on PC. And also I don't want to pay for online. So I was thinking about shifting more to PC, and so I wanted to get a gaming laptop. And after doing some research, a lot of the new laptops have better GPUs, and I didn't know if the 1050 was going to be serviceable enough for me to play the games that I wanted to. So I basically just jumped into it blind. So the price I paid for this at Black Friday was $499. So it was basically $500, which is really, really cheap for a gaming laptop. And for that price, it's pretty darn good. And you can still buy it on Walmart's website. So let me check what the current price is on Walmart's website. All right, so if you buy it right now, as of posting this video, you can get the same exact laptop for $629. So it did get quite a significant price increase after Black Friday, but this is still available at that price point. So yeah. I ran a couple different games, a couple different types of games as well, and basically I started off with pretty easy games that I knew this thing should run, and I benchmarked those games, and I went all the way up to something that I thought would push it pretty hard, and basically just kind of worked my way up there. And I've got quite a few games that I recorded. All of the gameplay that you're going to see was recorded externally on a capture card that was not dependent on the CPU or GPU of my computer. It's a completely external not graphics card, but capture card. So the recording did not impact the performance at all, and they were all of the games were ran at 1080p, and I'm pretty sure I ran them all at maximum graphics settings as well. So I'll talk a little bit about each game as I'm showing you some of the footage for it, and you'll see some of the performance and how this thing works. So let's get into that, and so you can see how these specs perform and judge if it's worth it or not. And then I'll come back and I'll tell you my opinions of the overall product itself. So the first game we're going to be taking a look at is called Hero Siege. Hero Siege is a 2D hack-and-slash Diablo-style game. I picked this one as the first benchmark because it is fairly simple and just a good starting point, in my opinion, to really see how simple indie games like Hero Siege play on this laptop. As you can see, in the bottom left I have a frames counter and also a GPU and CPU stress percentage. As we get through into some of this gameplay, you'll notice that even when there's a lot of enemies on screen and just a lot of action and effects, you'll notice that the GPU doesn't really get any stress out of it any more than like 4%. And the CPU does, however, kind of fluctuate, but it never really gets beyond like 40 or 30% really. So it's a fairly easy game to run on this system. It constantly is pretty much at 60 frames per second. During these tests I do put VSync on just because I prefer to run with VSync on. I know some people don't like to do that for benchmarks, but in my opinion, if it can run at the refresh rate of the screen, that's all you really want anyways. You're not going to notice any difference above 60 frames per second on this machine because of the 60 frames per sec, the 60 hertz refresh rate. So yeah, so in my opinion, this game runs really well. This is a solid choice for somebody just wanting a casual indie hack and slash game, and it runs really well on this machine, and there's no delays, there's no problems with the graphics or anything. It pretty much started up, ran perfectly. So let's move on to the next game, and I'll tell you a little bit about that one. So the next game that we're taking a look at here is called Torchlight. So for this game, this is another top-down hack and slash game. You'll notice that there's quite a few of these on this list because that is one of my favorite style games to play. So I have a lot of them. I picked this one. This one is an older title, just so we can sort of benchmark some older 3D games. And basically, this game is set to the absolute maximum settings and graphics, and it looks fantastic. It runs really well. As you can see, the CPU, even during high combat and high intensity scenes, is not really taxed at all. It's actually taxed even less than Hero Siege, which means, which leads me to believe that Hero Siege is actually more dependent on the CPU, and Torchlight probably offloads some of that to the GPU. As you can see, the GPU is up to 9%, and it kind of fluctuates here and there depending on how much is going on, but not too much. So as you can see, Torchlight runs really well. This would be a great choice for a hack and slash game if you wanted some more, some more depth and some more pleasing visuals. It really handles this no problem. I don't see it ever dropping. I'm pretty sure that this game is actually capped at 30 frames per second. Because I've tried adjusting settings, turning VSync off even on this title, and trying messing around with the settings, which are maxed out, but I could never get it to go above 30 frames per second, so it leads me to believe that this is actually capped at 30 frames per second, so we're pretty much hitting the top cap there, and it never drops, except for when when there's a loading screen, it drops down to 15 frames per second. Probably just because of the animations are actually going slower across the screen. So other than that, you're pretty much hitting a stable 30 frames per second maximum frame rate the entire time. And I don't really have any problems with this game. It's a really great one to run, and definitely looks nice on this PC. So this is a pretty easy title for this one to run. So let's move on to the next game. Alright, so the next title we're going to be taking a look at is another older title, just to show you some... We're pretty much working our way up slowly to more high intensity graphics. So we're going to be taking a look at Oblivion. Now Oblivion's another older 3D game, but this one is a little bit more taxing than Torchlight. It's an open world sandbox game. As you can see, I'm kind of running around the world. The graphics are set to the absolute maximum settings. Some of the things with this game, some of the settings are a little bit... you can't turn them all on at once because HDR can't run with the... I think it was the anti-aliasing on maximum. I think there was something to do how you couldn't have both running at the same time. But I set it to the ultra high preset. And as you saw, I was running around the world and I was seeing no frame drops. Again, I think this game might be set to be locked at 30 frames per second because it's been stable at 30 and there was no drops going up or down. So I think it's just set to 30 frames per second maximum, which we are hitting the entire time pretty much. As you can see, even during combat, there's not really any drops in frame rate. If you take a look at the CPU and the GPU, you can see that this is very easy for this PC to handle, as the CPU isn't really being taxed that much, and the GPU, this is probably the most taxing game we've ran so far for the GPU, but still, we're not even breaking 20% yet. It's running this no problem, and in addition to this, clip was actually also recorded while running quite a few different mods. This was running some character model mods so that the character models and the faces looked a little bit better. We were running also some other beautifying mods, and I was also running an armor mod that you can't really see, but I'm wearing some modded armor. So even with all those mods running and all the settings set to ultra high, you're not really seeing any performance hits whatsoever. It's running this game perfectly fine. And this would be a great one to check out if you were looking to get an open world RPG experience. As you can see, it runs it really well. The graphics look great. And yeah, so this is Oblivion on the ultra high settings, and it runs really well. So yeah, let's move on to the next game. Alright, so the next game we're going to be taking a look at is a RTS. And now this is actually... this is a little bit more of a recent game than the ones we've been taking a look at so far. We are going to be taking a look at the Homeworld Remastered collection. Now this is a more CPU intensive game. However, I do have the graphics set to the absolute maximum with the enhanced shadows and all the damage effects set for every ship, not just the capital ships. So I have all the settings pushed all the way up as high as they can go, and with the maximum anti-aliasing and everything. And I decided to show you a clip of a large-scale space encounter that has many ships being attacked at once, just to kind of show you the more extreme end of a conflict in this game. And as you can tell from this clip here, we're actually doing really well. It's handling it pretty darn well. You're seeing some frame fluctuations, but not many. We're sitting at 60 frames per second for the most part. It does drop down into the lower 50s here and there, depending on what's going on and how many ships are moving around. And as you can see, it's dropping a little bit more here. But it doesn't ever drop below 30 frames per second, and it's actually handling it very, very well. The CPU is being taxed about 45 to 50%, and depending on what you're looking at, it just depends. As you zoom in, it actually taxes the computer less. This is, like I said, a very high demand game for CPU. because there's a lot of things going on, a lot of small particle effects, a lot of AI working at the same time. The GPU is holding pretty steady at about 48%, no matter where we're really looking. So it's handling it pretty well, and yeah, this is a pretty good game. Now, this is probably the first game where we're not hitting the maximum frame rate of 60 frames per second. So if you wanted to if you wanted to hit that stable 60 frames per second, some settings I recommend changing is you could probably adjust the damage effects. So if you turn the damage to show visible damage just for capital ships, that would help alleviate some of that as well. You could probably just do the basic shadows instead of the enhanced shadows, would also really help a lot. And the texture effects really don't affect this game that much, so you could probably leave those on the highest setting and maybe drop one anti-aliasing here or there. But you shouldn't have to go as far as dropping anti-aliasing in order to hit that 60 frames per second solid frame rate. You should really only have to adjust the damage settings for the capital ships and maybe the shadows, and you should, or maybe the lighting effects too. You should be set if you do it that way. So that is pretty much the performance of Homeworld Remastered Collection on this PC. So let's move on to the next title. Alright, so the next game we're going to be taking a look at here on this computer is Grim Dawn. Grim Dawn is another top-down hack and slash RPG. This one is a more relatively recent one with a little bit more demanding graphics and particle effects. Right now we have the graphics set to the absolute maximum, and we have, I think I picked just the highest preset available, and it's running really well. So this one doesn't look to be as taxing as the Homeworld Remastered Collection. We're seeing the GPU kind of sit at 28-30%. CPU kind of fluctuates in the low 30s, upper 20s. Even when there are a lot of units on screen, we're holding pretty steady at 30 frames per second, which I'm pretty sure this is maxed out at, as it doesn't fluctuate up or down at all. We're just pretty much locked at that 30 frames per second cap, and it runs really well. As you can see, the ragdoll effects in some of the enemies, they're functioning perfectly fine. It's not causing any slowdowns. We're seeing good particle effects, and just overall pretty stable 30 frames per second frame rate. There's nothing really to say about this. If you wanted to get this game, you could just set it at the maximum graphic settings and you wouldn't have any trouble whatsoever. So this is another really great one to check out if you want another hack and slash RPG. This one you'll be able to safely run at the maximum settings and not have to worry about anything really. So let's move on to the next game. Alright, so these last three games are going to be the most demanding and the most taxing on the hardware that we're going to be taking a look at. So you'll have to forgive my performance in this game. When I was recording this clip, I was not using a controller, so I was using keyboard and mouse, and kind of shows really kind of sucked at this. But needless to say, this is Team Sonic Racing. This is a very recent game. I think it came out in 2018 or 2019, and right now we have the graphics set to 1080p. The absolute highest preset is what we have it set to right now, and we're seeing some pretty good performance. Now, this is a very taxing game as it is incredibly recent, and it shows. We're seeing fluctuations between upper 40s to 60 frames per second with the VSync enabled. So we're seeing about 70% around there for GPU stress, and about anywhere from like 70 down to low 60s of CPU stress, and it's handling it pretty well. You could definitely, if you wanted to hit that stable 60 frames per second, you could definitely adjust some settings and hit that. I would recommend probably, lowering it down to like one of the medium settings if you wanted to hit the 60 frames per second. But if you don't mind gaming it around gaming 30 plus frames per second, I think that this can be easily done at the highest settings in this game. And as you can see, I picked probably the most graphically intensive level, in my opinion, for this game, and it's handling it really well. So it really depends on what level you're on. Some of the other levels have less going on with the tracks, so you'll see better performance at the highest settings. But for this level, I think this is probably the most has the most going on. So this is a good, basically, test of like the more high end graphical levels, and I think it handles it very well for what I paid for this laptop. So I think that this would be definitely a playable title at the highest settings. If you wanted it to be more fluid, you could probably get away with turning down some of the settings here and there, and you'll definitely hit that 60 frames per second solid frame rate. So yeah, this is Team Sonic Racing, which is, like I said, a fairly new title, and yeah, let's move on to the next title. Alright, for this next title, we're going to be taking a look at the original Tomb Raider reboot. This is not as recent as the Team Sonic Racing, but when it did come out, it was a very graphic. It was probably one of the better looking games graphically. So I decided to throw this one into the mix to showcase you what a semi-modern title would look like. So all of these settings are set to the absolute highest maximum preset, and I have it set to 1080p. And as you can see, this game is a little bit more stressful on the computer than Team Sonic Racing's in some aspects of the game. We're not hitting a solid 60 frames per second the entire time, but we are still hitting a very playable frame rate. We're still hitting anywhere from the low to mid 40s all the way up to 60 frames per second, with the average being somewhere around 47 frames per second. So it just depends on which scene you're in and what's going on. But this is the highest graphics setting that you can have in this game. And it's running really well. The GPU is currently sitting at about 40% stress, and the CPU is fluctuating anywhere from 40 all the way up to like 70 or 80, just depending on what's going on. This seems to be a very CPU intensive game. So if you wanted this to be a more smooth 60 frames per second experience, you could probably set this you could probably turn this down from ultra high to just high, or maybe even medium, and you'll hit that solid 60 frames per second frame rate. You could also, alternatively, you could also set it to the medium graphics settings, or 900p, and I think that would really help your experience in this game. So overall, I think Tomb Raider runs really well, and I think this would be a solid choice, and is a good indication of the sort of games that this computer can handle. So let's move on to the next and final game in the lineup. Alright, for the last game on this list, we're going to be taking a look at Hellblade: Senua's Sacrifice. Now, this game is probably the most graphically impressive game on our list. It is probably going to be the most demanding that I've got in this lineup. And as you can see, the graphics are absolutely stunning. The graphics settings that I have set is 1080p at absolute maximum graphical performance. Now, this game, at least from what I've played so far, I honestly haven't beat this game, it doesn't have a lot of high action, so we're just barely staying above 30 frames per second, which is, in my opinion, fine for a not action-heavy game. But this is a lot less of a solid performance than some of the other games on our list. As you can see, this is pushing our GPU pretty far. We're sitting at like 76 to 72%, and the CPU is fluctuating quite heavily as well, anywhere from like 40 to maybe 60%. And we're seeing about an average FPS of about 36 frames per second. So it's a playable experience, and we're not really seeing too many sub 30 dips. We do see them every now and again, like when you get these really high detail close-ups, it's really taxes the GPU, and we're seeing some dips. But for the most part, we're staying above 30 frames per second, which is pretty solid. Now, granted, this is on the highest graphical settings on a fairly recent high visual game. So you can turn some of these down and get some, definitely get some more performance out of it. So instead of having it at the highest graphic setting, you can maybe turn it down to like a medium or something like that, and you should be able to get more close to 60 frames per second. I'm not sure if you'll be able to get to 60 frames per second and keep it solid up there, but you should be able to get pretty close. You can also drop this to 900p and eke out some performance that way. That should be a big boost. But there is a lot of settings to play with in the graphical menus, so you do have a lot to work with. But nonetheless, if you played it at 1080p at the maximum graphical fidelity, you do have a very playable experience, assuming that this game doesn't pick up action later in the game. Like I said, I just recently bought this game, so I'm not sure if it gets more intense or not, but so far it just kind of seems pretty it seems a little bit slower pace, so you should be playable at 30 frames per second. But it does handle it pretty well. Considering the price that I paid for this computer, this is very impressive and really solid performance for this laptop. I honestly did not expect it to run this well on here, so it was a pleasant surprise. So that is the last benchmark that we have, so let's wrap it up. Alright, now that you've seen some of the benchmarks and some of the gameplay, for my experiences of owning this computer, I am very, very surprised at the performance. I honestly didn't think, especially games like Hellblade, I didn't think that it would run as well as it does, especially at the maximum graphical performance as it does on this computer. Now, I will say the 8 gigs of RAM it would be nice to have more, but I'm pretty sure that I'm pretty sure it's a single channel setup in there, and I'm pretty sure there's an empty slot. So I'm not 100% sure because, like I said, I haven't torn it down yet. But I think it's a single stick, so you should be able to upgrade the RAM to 16 gigs or something along those lines. So I'll probably be doing that in the future, and you'll be able to eke out a little bit more performance that way because you'll be running dual channel. Overall, though, the 1050 performs incredibly well. Depending on the sort of games you want to run, you should be able to handle most modern games. You will be able to play every game coming out or has come out so far. Some games you might have to bump down the settings from the highest graphical settings to maybe just high or even medium. Especially if you want to hit 60 frames per second, stuff that's very graphically demanding, like Hellblade, you'll definitely have to drop down to medium, or you can alternatively leave the graphics up to high and then drop it down to 900p if you don't mind playing at 900p. But for the most part, for most games out there, you'll be able to max out the graphics and run it at 1080p native resolution. So I would say it's a very, very serviceable machine, especially if you could pick one up for like $500 like I did. That's a no-brainer. Honestly, for that price, I am blown away by the performance. Now, for $630, I still think it's a really good bargain, and I think it's definitely one worth checking out. Now, in terms of other things that this computer comes with, like I said, it does have a green LED backlit keyboard that has a couple different variable brightness settings. Software-wise, you do have some bloatware installed out of the factory. I removed all of it from my computer, but you do have McAfee antivirus. You have all the stuff from the Microsoft Store, like Candy Crush Shotgun, stuff like that. It also came with some HP Assistant program that you can just get rid of as well. But once you get rid of, there's not a whole lot of bloatware. There's a couple different programs here or there, but it's definitely not the worst I've seen in terms of bloatware. And most of it's very easy to get rid of, so it's not that bad for that in terms of bloatware. But I will say, like I said before, I will drive home that the screen is really nice. Yes, it's not a 144 hertz panel or anything like that, or 120. I can't remember what the next step up is, but for a 60 hertz panel at 1080p, I expected them to cheap out on the screen. But honestly, the screen's really good. The colors are really good. You do, obviously it's not a, you know, it's not a 4K screen, and it's not, you know, it's not the absolute best, but for the price and the specs that you get in the computer itself, I think it's actually a pleasantly surprising screen. But I will say that I definitely recommend this laptop. So if you were looking at a good entry point for gaming and you wanted to get a laptop like I did for portability and whatnot, this is definitely one to check out. I highly recommend it. The build quality is really good. It's mostly plastic, but what I really like about it, it has a single monolith hinge in the middle, and it feels very sturdy, and it doesn't wobble very much at all. So I definitely recommend it. It's definitely a really great machine for the price, and I definitely think you should check it out. So thank you guys for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed this review. Hope it was informative. If you have any questions on any games and how they run, or how I think they might run on this computer, leave them in the comment box below, and I try to respond to all of my comments, and I definitely read all my comments, so I'll try to get back as soon as possible. And if you want to see more videos like this, let me know as well. And if you have any other comments, just let me know, and I'll check them out. So thank you guys for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I'll see you guys next time. Peace.